Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 147 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Dr. Katie Davis for this episode, and this week we tackle a thorny parenting topic, screens. This pandemic period lately of online school and work and play dates, happy hours, fitness classes, therapy sessions, music lessons, and so much more has taught us that asking whether screens and screen time are good or bad is not necessarily the right question anymore. Technology has just become far too central to our lives. And Katie is a researcher at the University of Washington who directs the UW Digital Youth Lab, and she has a new book for parents called Technology's Child: Digital Media's Role in the Ages and Stages of Growing Up. Listen for a fascinating discussion of the nuances of this issue, and her scope of the book is from very young children up through teenagers, so there should be something for everyone here. Plus, she answers that question everyone with young kids wants to know. If kids are not supposed to have screen time, what about FaceTime with grandparents who live 3,000 miles away? Before we jump into my discussion with Katie, I wanted to make sure you know that my latest book is now available. It's called Widowed Parents Unite, 52 Tips to Get Through the First Year from One Widowed Parent to Another. And I'd like to read you a brief description here. Widowed Parents Unite shines as a beacon of hope and practical wisdom for those facing the first year of parenting in the wake of loss. This book weaves together the voices of 49 moms and dads from around the globe and offers a rich blend of support and advice in bite-sized pieces, perfect for moments when grief seems all-consuming. So here's why I love it, because 48 widowed moms and dads, in addition to myself, got together to bring you this book, and each of them shares their experiences and their reflections specifically around this question of what would I say to a newer widowed parent in the first year of loss. And the 48 contributing authors are so thoughtful and open and sharing. I've heard from so many readers how needed a book like this is. Because if you're anything like me, you've figured out by now that widowed parenting is not easy. And so I'm really glad to be able to bring you this book, and I hope you'll look for it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever you like to buy your books. Okay, so that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Dr. Katie Davis. Katie is an associate professor at the University of Washington Information School and director of the UW Digital Youth Lab. Her newest book is Technology's Child: Digital Media's Role in the Ages and Stages of Growing Up, which presents a research-backed guide to technology's accelerating impact on the full arc of child development, from toddlers to 20-somethings. She's joining us today from Seattle, Washington. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, well, I've been looking forward to speaking with you. And first, I have to say, now I know listeners can't see me, but I got dressed especially for the occasion here. I have on my bright purple Huskies hoodie.
I really appreciate that. That's great.
I went to UW for grad school, and my husband Dennis went there for undergrad. And I am a proud follower of Dubs on social media. Dubs, for those of you who don't know, is the adorable husky dog mascot who has a cute social media feed. So that's been fun. So we'll just say go dogs, and we'll get started.
Fantastic. Here. Go dogs.
Yeah. All right. Let's just jump right in. So my kids are 16 and 18 now. And so when I was kind of getting my parenting feet wet, it seemed like all the focus was like, screens are bad. How do we limit screen time? How much do we limit screen time? Are you a good parent or not a good parent if you allow X amount or Y amount, or if you allow it on weekdays? Or it's almost like dessert. like kind of begrudgingly.
Right.
I guess you can have some. I guess a little bit won't kill you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can't have too much because that's just bad. And that seemed to be all the focus. And this was, with my kids being 16 and 18, this was 10 years ago, whatever,
right.
15 years ago.
Pre-pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. And so I guess, in fact, speaking of the pandemic, I noticed you said in the introduction here, before the pandemic, the collective zeitgeist seemed to focus on some variation of the following questions. Screens, are they good or bad for children's development? Screen time, how much is too much? And you talk about how you believe things have sort of shifted now. Can you tell us about that? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and I, as a researcher in this space for about 20 years now, I've been wanting to get the conversation beyond those questions of, are screens good or are they bad? Because that's generally the kind of questions I used to get before the pandemic. But then the pandemic hit and everyone realized, well, screens are here. We need screens. Our kids are in front of screens pretty much all day for school. And it's the only way to stay in touch with relatives and friends. And I think at that point, we were headed towards that anyway, but we started more collectively as a society, I think, to become readier to engage with, well, okay, so my kid is in front of a screen for a substantial part of the day. What are they doing with that screen? Is all screen time created equal? And no, of course it's not. And so I think we're readier than we were before to really engage with the question, well, what kinds of technology experiences are good for my kid at different stages of development, and which kinds of experiences should I be more wary of? And so I started writing this book actually right before the pandemic. And then, I had to take a pause because my son was 3 and it was impossible to write a book and parent at the same time. But I noticed, that, things seem to be changing here with just how, just things as simple as watching the news or reading the newspaper. The conversation was starting to shift. And so when I returned to writing the book, I really engaged with that new, deeper conversation.
I'm glad you're asking these questions because it's, as a parent who's not a researcher and expert on this topic, it's hard to know, right? And it's
Absolutely.
Like you hear what you hear in the news, you hear what you hear from your peers, your parenting friends, maybe you read some books. And I also think it's interesting that you're tackling this question, I think from toddlers to 20-somethings. And so I'm hoping we can cover some different points in time here because my listeners, actually that squares squarely with my listeners who are parenting kids from babies through college age.
Yeah. I'm a developmental scientist, and so I wanted to look at the full arc of development. And I think most of my research, most of my research focuses on teens and emerging adults, sometimes tweens. But 6 years ago, I became a parent myself and I got really interested in younger kids, of course. And so this book was my opportunity to put my expertise in early childhood to use and just look at the entire arc of development. And also, I would say that my son and becoming a parent was a big motivation for writing this book in the first place, because as you mentioned, their parents are getting so many confusing messages, and you mentioned the media, but I think researchers sometimes we're not very helpful either, because we love the on the one hand, on the other hand kind of answers. We love the complexity and the subtleties, and so I would always, when people would ask me questions like, okay, so what's the verdict? Is technology good or bad for kids? I'd never give a concrete answer. And then I became a parent and I felt really bad. I thought, oh, my answers are not at all helpful. I need to do better here. And so this book is my attempt to translate all that complexity of the research, because the truth is it is complex and there is no one size fits all when it comes to tech and kids. But I do think there's some concrete guidance that research can provide parents and others who are involved in young people's lives that can be helpful and actually can be put to use for making those day-to-day decisions that parents are making every single day.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like you said, sometimes it comes down to all this stuff. Do I let my kid play Minecraft or not? Or like, do I, right? Like,
yeah. And for me, it's it used to be how many episodes of Paw Patrol. Now it's how many episodes of Pokemon. And also, when do I let Oliver start playing video games kind of more seriously? He plays maybe a little bit every month or so. But he's not really into my video games. But I know that once I open up that box, we're going to have to be very careful and deliberate about it. And then, like when your kids get a bit older, when do I get them a phone? What sort of parental control should I put on it? There's it's never ending, these questions.
Well, and you mentioned something, I forget your words, something about when do I open that box of video games or something? It might get opened without you. I'm thinking.
Absolutely. That's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. My son was maybe kindergarten, something, and he was going to a friend's house, and the mother said, "How do you feel about the Wii?" which was popular at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, great. Because, and we had a Wii, and we played things like Wii Sports, where you're like bowling and doing stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, the Wii, great. Yeah, they want to do that. Fine. Well, he came home and they had played Lego Star Wars Wii.
Very different.
It is very different. Not that it's necessarily bad, but it opened a whole different box of issues.
Absolutely.
With that game. Yeah. And there was no putting that genie back in the bottle.
No, and that's true. And so that's a really great point, that often it's not just up to you as a parent. So many of these decisions are contingent on what your kids' friends are doing and how their parents are parenting, and how many getting into the age of having a phone. Well, all my friends are having a phone. They're getting a phone. So why can't I? Or all my friends are on social media. Why can't I be on social media? So it's really hard territory for parents to navigate.
So let's, I want to start with you have a 2-step decision tool for managing your child's tech use. And I think it's useful to start with that kind of as a framework as we think about the discussion here. Can you tell us about these kind of 2 steps or 2 factors that a parent might want to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really, this is the tool that I introduced, and it's really a lens or a framework for parents to help guide their day-to-day decisions about what to let their kids engage with when it comes to technology, for how long. So and it really comes down to 2 questions. And so the first question that you need to ask yourself, and I ask myself this every day with Oliver, you need to ask, is this experience self-directed? And by self-directed, I mean, who's in control here? Is my child in control of this tech experience? Are they guiding what's going to happen next? Are they exercising agency and creativity and, thinking, different diverse ways of thinking? So where is the agency? Is it with the technology, or is it with your child? And unfortunately, a lot of technologies are designed to co-opt our attention, to co-opt kids' attention, and kind of lead them from one experience to another. Often, if you see little kids, or actually any kids for that matter, sitting with kind of glazed eyes in front of a TV, that's a pretty good indication that they're not so in control of their attention. And I'm not saying that kids shouldn't watch TV at all. My son watches TV every day, but not for that long. So we usually use it as a way to unwind after dinner and then before Tubby and reading. And so it is part of our day. But I know that when Oliver's watching Pokemon, sometimes he's highly engaged and sometimes he talks with me about it. And actually, in those cases, it can be quite an active experience, but often it's just sort of a passive experience, which is fine. But I want to try, as much as possible, when he's interacting with technologies, I want him to be in the driver's seat, and I want him to be exploring new worlds and creating things. And so that's the kinds of experiences that I'm looking for when it comes to his technology experiences. And then the second question that you have to ask yourself is this community supported? And so when it comes to little kids, oftentimes the community support is coming in the form of parents who are deciding, well, what experiences should I be introducing my child to, and for how long? And so it's all that sort of gatekeeping and monitoring, and also sometimes engaging with your child and trying to learn and alongside with them, and sometimes extend the technology experience and connect it to other aspects of their life. So that's really often the form of community support that comes in for young kids. As kids get older, the community support starts to look a bit different. Parents' conversations start to become a little bit more complex, a little bit more cerebral. Sometimes the support comes from the platform that they're engaging in itself. So if kids are on Discord or TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, communities evolve on those platforms, and there could be more or less community support in those platforms. And so those are the two keys, I would say, the two questions that you're asking to see if a particular technology experience is supporting development or not so much. So is it self-directed? Is it community supported? And technology experiences that do meet those two criteria, they're pretty much, they can actually be part of a great, healthy development for kids. But it's really important for parents to tune in and look at their kids' technology experiences through that lens so that they can understand, is this good or is it not so good for my kid?
Interesting. Okay. So thank you for going through that with us. So we have these two, I don't know what you call them, factors or something, considerations. Self-directed. Is it self-directed, and is it community supported? So let's dive into each of those a little bit. I'm thinking about the self-directed, and it's reminded me, as I was reading your book, I was thinking, I mentioned the Lego Star Wars Wii that my son started playing, and then he would play it actually with my late husband, with his dad. So then you got the community supported thing because they're playing together, they're talking, let's go in this room, let's get this character, let's, I don't know, get points or whatever you do in Lego Star Wars Wii. But the self-directed part always bugged me, because in some respects the game was self-directed because you're choosing like how to maneuver through the world and what to do next and all that. But here's the part, and I wonder what you think about this. Somehow you couldn't save. You couldn't just stop at any point and save your progress. And so I, as a parent, would get super frustrated when I would say it's time for dinner, or it's time for bed, or it's time to leave to go to wherever. And the answer is, I can't stop now, because I just got all these gems or all these points, or I just did whatever that was good. But if I stop now,
you're going to lose all that progress.
I'm going to lose all that progress, and I won't get the General Grievous character. I don't know, whatever the objective was. And right. And at the time I was like, how can that be? How can this game be set up that way for kids?
Yeah. And it doesn't need to be set up that way. That if they truly couldn't, I'm not familiar with that particular game, but if you have games like that where you can't save your progress, I would actually call that a dark pattern. This is a concept that I talk about in the book, where designers specifically design certain features to keep you in their platform, to co-opt your attention, or just to keep you playing. And so when it comes to technology and kids, some designers create virtual characters who cry if you leave the environment, or they make it really hard to navigate home and then exit. In your case, leaving and then all your progress is gone. That is a tactic to keep children engaged. And that's a really good example of something that is not so self-directed. And as that example shows, it's often not so clear. Like, there could be elements of self-direction, but then that one element clearly isn't. And so that's sort of a bit of a red flag. But engage looking at what does the experience actually look like during the gameplay. Maybe that is really nice and self-directed, but if it extends for too long and starts to infringe on dinner or other activities, that is not so great, not so self-directed.
Well, and so I picked up on, in the book, you were talking about an element of self-direction being, is the child choosing when to stop? Are they free to choose that? And that's where I was like, oh my God, that was the problem with Lego Star Wars Wii. The child wasn't free to choose to stop in the middle of the level or whatever, or wasn't free to answer my call to dinner in the middle of the level. Because that's a pretty big penalty to lose all that progress.
Absolutely. I can totally understand why he wouldn't want to leave. But yeah, and if you look, so when Oliver was maybe 3 and 4, he's 6 now, but when he was 3, 4, it would be really interesting. And it just so happened that I was writing the book then, but he'd be on his tablet, but the way his attention was being used and deployed really varied depending on what app he was using. And so he loved this Paw Patrol Rescue Run game, and actually he still kind of likes it now. But when he was playing that game, he was not able to talk to me. He just was focused completely on getting from point A to point B and collecting as many badges and as many pup treats as he could. And he would play this for as long as I would let him, versus if he was playing with a drawing app or a painting app. He had this painting app that he really liked, Peppa's Paint Box. And that one was much more similar to how he might draw and paint in the analog world, where he would open it up and there'd be a blank canvas, and then he would just start drawing freeform. He would talk to me. He would show me what he was doing. Sometimes he would let me join in. And it was much more similar to a non-tech experience. And that episode would tend to last maybe 15 or 20 minutes. And then he'd kind of just naturally want to move on to something else. And 15 to 20 minutes for little kids is about the cadence of a typical play session when it's not online. And so these are the things where you want to see, how is my child's attention being used right now? Are they in control, or is this application, the app, the video game, whatever it is that kind of calling the shots?
Interesting. Okay. Well, and then I think I wonder what you think of this other aspect to this other, well, I don't know what to call it. I'll just give the example. My daughter, who's in high school, is an artist, and she has an iPad with an Apple Pencil and a very sophisticated drawing software. I don't know if it's Procreate, or I don't know what it's called. Some super fancy digital drawing software, which is incredible. And she loves drawing things on it. And in fact, she's creating artwork for the children's books that we're working on.
Oh, neat.
And so, yeah, so so I'm looking at that and I'm thinking it's self-directed. She can pick it up when she wants to, put it down when she wants to. The app isn't like blaring at her, like, don't go away, right? When she's in it, it's completely self-directed with all these flexible and powerful art tools. I don't know that it's so much community supported so much, except that she can show me her artwork when she's done and we can talk about it. And so there's that aspect to it. And including, there's kind of a neat feature where you can play back a video of the creation and put it on super fast, and see the thing come to life, right? But what I also wonder then is, if you're on an iPad doing this amazing thing, you could also have something pop up that says you missed this thing on TikTok, and this thing just happened in the Congress that Twitter's talking about, and whatever, right? You could have those kinds of things that are completely unrelated to the task and application that you're using popping in. And as a parent, you say, well, if I want my kid, if I support my kid doing something like drawing on the iPad, and yet that also means they're using the iPad, which could bring in all kinds of other things. Like, how does one begin to think about that?
Oh, it's so hard because it's all converging on one device. I know, it's so hard. Well, I have an Apple Pencil. I love it. I'm not at all a good artist, but I know what you mean. It's amazing the capabilities with that you can do with that pencil. And I think that's an outstanding example of a self-directed experience with technology. For me personally, with my iPad, I have decided I don't have any email or any notifications or any social media apps at all on my iPad, because for me, it's just when I'm on it, I'm either reading student papers or I'm reading for pleasure or just doing something, closed off and singular. And so there are these workarounds. And I'm not saying that they're perfect, but workarounds where you disable notifications, or you just decide on this device, I am not going to have any social media. My son has a tablet, and it's very limited what he can do, and it's all controlled by me. And I'm not saying that these are easy things to do, and this is my area. I'm supposed to be an expert here, and it took me a while to set this up, I have to say. And this is kind of a beef I have with the tech industry more generally, is they don't make it easy for us as parents to support our kids in self-directed and community supported experiences. And so often we do have a lot of homework to do on our end to figure out, like, how do we disable notifications or disable them at a certain time? And it definitely takes effort, which I would hope my ideal would be in the future that the tech companies just make privacy, make sort of muted notifications, make all of that the default, and then let us add things back. But of course, that's not particularly realistic, not suitable for their bottom line. But and I think that's where regulation comes in. But that's a whole other conversation. But right now, there's parents do shoulder a lot of the burden for carving out spaces with technology that aren't so bombarding and just overstimulating for their children.
Interesting. Okay. So we have this two-step decision tool, the self-directed and the community supported. And then you talk about how there's kind of 3 different layers of the technology that we should look at. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is a way to help. So one thing that I really emphasize throughout the book, no matter what age or stage you're talking about, technology design matters, the way a technology has been designed. So, just so far in our conversation, we've given lots of different examples of different experiences that you can have on a tablet. And it's really those different experiences come because they have been designed in a certain way. The pup treats on Paw Patrol are a certain design feature that keeps you going and going. And so design is absolutely critical when you think about kids' experiences. But the way you go from the design of the technology to kids' behavior, sometimes that's not so obvious. So I talk about these 3 layers to help get from the tech side of things to the kid and the behavior kind of side of things. So the first layer is the feature layer. And that's, all of the things that the tech designer is putting in there. So if you think of Netflix and YouTube, that autoplay feature, notifications,
yes.
All of those things, those are specific design choices that don't have to be there.
The Lego Star Wars Wii game designers saying that you can't save in the middle of a level. That's a design choice that they've made.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can only save if you get to the next level. Yes, absolutely. That is a design choice. Right now, I'm doing an interesting study where we're comparing different social media sites. And, we often will just say social media as one big thing, but different sites have different features. And so if you look at a site like Be Real, you can only post once a day. And that's very different from TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat. And Snapchat itself has very interesting specific features like Snap Streaks. So those are that's the feature layers where you find all of those designs that then impact the practice layer. And that's the next layer up. And at the practice layer, those are all of the things that one is able to do. So all of the things that you can do because those features are there or other features are not there will affect, how much privacy you have, or how public your posts are, or how you engage and interact with other people. That all of the things that you do with a particular app or platform, that's happening at the practice layer. And then all of those actions, and it's very much going to be shaped by who's interacting with the technology, how old they are, who their friends are. So context really matters there. But then all of that practice and all of those actions kind of bubble up to form a kind of culture on and this is primarily when we're talking about networked platforms, for instance, like Minecraft, a Minecraft server, or Instagram, or Be Real, or Snapchat. You go to any one of these platforms and your experience is going to be different there. And it's not just because of the way it's been designed, but it's also because there are just different cultures, because based on that design and then how that design interacts with people and their motivations and their developmental level, that's then going to create a particular culture. And so, Instagram often gets a rap of being like this prom queen where everyone's trying to pose and look perfect. And then Snapchat is generally a little bit goofier, and Be Real is supposed to be more authentic. And so, it's that's really what I'm talking about when I talk about the culture layer. And it's just a way of thinking about, technology is not just this one monolithic thing, or games or social media when we get into those specific kinds of technologies. There's a lot of subtlety there, and it is coming from how it's been designed, and then how that design interacts with people, and in this case, kids.
Aha. Okay. Interesting. And so then when we look at the child development question, I guess starting with earlier childhood, I think you talk in the book about how early literacy and also executive function are two of the primary things going on in that early childhood period. So how should we be thinking about screens in relation to those two topics?
Yeah. So, I'm looking at the whole arc of child development in this book. And so I needed to find a way to focus it in some way. So I thought, okay, well, as a developmental scientist, what are some key skills that are particularly important at these different stages of development? And so when you're talking about little kids, one of the biggest things that they need to learn is how to gain control over their behavior and their emotion. And that constellation of skills is called executive function. Sometimes it's referred to as self-regulation. And that is just a huge, important skill. You're developing it all the way through childhood, but early childhood is really a sensitive period for its development. And it's associated with all sorts of long-term outcomes, like academic outcomes, relationship outcomes, even earning potential, like when you're an adult. So it's a really important skill. And when it comes to screens and self-regulation, I think there's again, it's coming down to, you really want to find, as much as you can, technology experiences that are self-directed, so that your child can maintain the control over their attention and over their behaviors. Another really important piece is transitions. So for little kids, transitions are really hard. And that's because, they get pulled into this one activity, and then all of a sudden they're being asked to do something different. And it can be really jarring for them, especially if they don't have those skills of just kind of controlling their emotions and their behavior and then switching. And if you have something like autoplay that's just playing them video after video, it's going to be that much harder for them to develop those self-regulation skills. And so, so there are a lot of designs and dark patterns that make it really hard for little kids to maintain control over their attention. And I would say with that is this constant delicate balance that I think parents are trying to strike, where, yes, absolutely, sometimes we feel like we just need a break, or your kid needs a break, someone needs a break in the house, and so we give them a tablet or a phone and they're interacting with it. But how much time should we let them spend on it? And do we always, if they're fussy or if we're tired, if our go-to strategy is to always give them a screen, that is something that I would really urge parents to try and avoid. Sometimes is absolutely fine. And I do this as a parent. I can get really exhausted and I work long hours. And so sometimes I just, sit Oliver in front of a tablet or the TV and he watches something. We can both have downtime. But I'm very careful that if he's complaining on a weekend, let's say, typically it's a Sunday afternoon and he's complaining he's bored, I very rarely will give him a screen to ease his boredom, because I think that being bored for kids is actually a great thing to struggle through and to figure out, okay, well, what are you going to do next to get yourself unbored? And there's lots of executive function development that's happening in those moments of boredom and figuring out what you're going to do. And it can be uncomfortable and not very pleasant for parents to go through that with their children. But if you can just try and push through it, you're doing some great things for your kid, because they're learning not to always move to and look to a screen to solve their problems, or to entertain them, or to soothe them, or whatever it is. They're looking and developing skills to regulate themselves and to look towards and build their own internal resilience, which is going to really serve them well going forward.
Interesting. Okay, so these are some really important distinctions, and I'm glad also to hear, you saying, I think if I'm interpreting correctly, like, look, sometimes we're tired and we need a break, and my listeners are now single parents with all the jobs in the house, and maybe an outside job, earning the money and parenting however many children they have. And sometimes people need a break, and that's okay.
Yeah. And I'm a single parent as well. And I only have one child, but he's little, and it's, on the weekends, it's all me. And so, and sometimes I get really tired, and right now also I'm teaching an online class that kind of creeps into the weekend, and just, I'm really tired a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's absolutely fine to turn to TV or whatever it is occasionally, but to do so consciously and be aware of, okay, the overarching goal here is as much as possible to, when we can, have a self-directed, community-supported technology experience. But also sometimes we need a little bit of downtime, and, watching an episode of our favorite show can actually be a really nice, relaxing experience. And it can be sometimes a chance for parents to have a break, sometimes to join in with their kids. And so that's absolutely, the goal is not like complete adherence to only the best. If you think about nutrition, it's totally fine to mix it up a little bit. And sometimes you have cheat days, sometimes you have pizza and ice cream, and that's totally fine.
Gotcha. Okay. And before we leave the topic of early childhood, and gosh, I think we could talk about this for like the next 3 hours, because there's so many interesting things you've dived into, and important things. But before we leave early childhood, the proverbial, like, is it okay for my kid to have FaceTime with grandma who lives 3,000 miles away? The sense I got out of your book is, yes, that's a good thing.
That's absolutely a great thing. And actually, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they're pretty stringent on the guidelines they set for parents when it comes to kids and screen time. But they do make an exception for video chat. And that's because there's some pretty good research showing that video chat, actually kids of a certain age, little babies, it's questionable how much they're getting from it. It's really hard for them to make sense of seeing a 2D image and then translating that in their mind to a 3D space or representation. But, starting around 2-3, kids get it with video chat. And absolutely, if they're talking with their grandparents or other family members, that is a socially contingent interaction where the person on the other end knows them and is responding to what they say in a very personalized way. And that's actually, touching a little bit on the early literacy development. That's a really big way kids develop like key early literacy skills, is just by this back and forth between them and the caregiver. There's a lot of personalized support that happens in that context. And so video chat is perfect for that. And it's a little bit different from your typical interactive screen experience, which, my son, he might interact with a drawing app, and that's great, and it's interactive. It's not socially contingent because that app doesn't know that his name is Oliver and that he loves pizza and that he loves Pokemon. It just is responding to his touch on the screen. And so that's an interactive experience. It's not a socially contingent experience. But video chat is. And so, yeah, I think that rightfully is quite different from other screen experiences.
Gotcha. Okay, socially contingent. That's an important concept then. As we think about a little bit older, like grade school kind of age, we start thinking about the video game question. And you actually, it sounds like games like Minecraft and Roblox and Pokemon Go actually have some good things going for them. Can you tell us a little bit about, how do you parse those or think about those in light of the models and criteria you've been talking about here?
Yeah. So video games are really tricky. There's a lot of very conflicting scholarship research on video games. There's kind of two camps that really do not agree at all. And this is particularly in the realm of violent video games. So really not so much Pokemon Go or Minecraft. But yeah, so some researchers are adamant that violent video games causes aggression, and then others are adamant that it doesn't. But again, I would say, to cut through all of that, let's just go back to, is my child experiencing this video game in a self-directed, community-supported way? And there are experiences that you can have with Minecraft where your answer to both of those questions is yes, absolutely. And there are experiences with Minecraft where it's no, not really. And that can, can come down to who you're playing with, or what mode you're playing, if it's in survivor mode or creative mode. All of the games are so multi-dimensional and so multifaceted that you just can't say that games are good or bad. And the way they interact with individual kids and the context of where they're playing and who they're playing with, all of that matters. But again, you just come back to, are they in control of their attention? Are they experiencing agency? In Minecraft or Roblox, maybe they're learning some pretty cool skills like how to code, and maybe they're having a lot of fun with their friends. And maybe that was a lifeline, especially during the pandemic, a way to interact with their friends. And that provided really important community support. On the other hand, maybe they're playing solo and they're playing so much that it's getting in the way of meeting up with their friends offline. So it's, it's going to be different for different kids, but the questions are the same, and the answers that you're looking for are the same. And so that, I think, is how we address the video game question. The trick, and the reason why I'm holding off as long as possible with video games, is just that they are designed to be so compelling and so hard to put down. And so it is really hard to find that balance. And it's not just a matter of, okay, we found the balance and we're good now. Every day you kind of have to renegotiate it, and it can be exhausting to do. So, I'm delaying that as much as I can. And then, as you go out into older kids, tweens, teens, again, same questions when it comes to, when do I get my kid a phone? When are they allowed to go on social media? How do I support them with social media? You're really, you're looking out for, well, are they in control of this experience? Do they experience agency? Or are they really kind of being led? Are they feeling like they, teens often feel like they need to be available to their friends. They need to be online, and because otherwise they're going to miss out on important social interactions. And so they need a lot of support around that from caregivers and other friends, teachers, and so on.
Well, okay, so this is interesting now. So moving more into that tween years, you talk about how technology kind of becomes a flashpoint, that delicate balance, right? But separation and connection during early adolescence. And I thought it was interesting. You talked about how parents, when they get their kids their first phone, parents are usually thinking of it in terms of safety. They can call me when they need a pickup. I can call them if I don't know where they are, like any of that kind of connection with the parents' safety aspect. But that teens view it, or tweens view it differently. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so from our research with the tweens in the Seattle area, but also I've done a lot of research in other countries and states, it's typically the same thing you hear. The parents are introducing the phone, or at least telling themselves, no, I got this phone so that, for safety, so I can keep in touch with my kid, and so that they can walk to school by themselves or take the bus. And the kid is saying, yes, this is my ticket to independence. And I think both of these things can be true. For instance, the walking to school piece. Yes, that if you have the phone on hand and you're able to have that little bit of independence to go on your own from home to school, that can be awesome. Tweens also mean, yes, now I can speak with my friends and I can interact with them and I can go online and all of this stuff. And so I think in that respect, so when I first started doing this research. Parents really were caught off guard. This, in 2004, 5, 6, they didn't know what was going on. And often, they would be getting pressure from their kids to get them a phone, and they didn't kind of know what to do. So often they would, if they did let their kids have a phone, they just sort of let them go off. They're off to the races with the phone. All the floodgates are open. They have access to all apps. I think now parents are a lot savvier, and I think rightfully so. So if you think about when you're teaching your kids to swim or to ride a bike, you're not going to just throw them in the deep end. You're not going to put them on a two-wheeler right away without any sort of support. You need to give them some training wheels, some flotation devices. And I think it's the same thing with introducing a phone. It's not the case where you either don't have a phone or you do have a phone and you have access to everything. No, it's like it's a renegotiation, a negotiation, and a conversation of, okay, well, what apps are we going to put on this phone? What kinds of controls am I going to set up to start with? And then we'll go from there. And I'm not saying for parents to use controls to spy on their kids or anything like that, but it should be part of this conversation of, okay, there's a lot of power in this small device, and I just want to make sure that you're safe and that you're having a good experience. Even just the simple act of communicating with friends through text is not something that kids necessarily are good at or know how to do. And you, as a parent, may not have the technical savviness of your child, or you may, depending on, your comfort with tech, but you have the wisdom and the knowledge and that maturity to help them navigate those interpersonal aspects of communicating through network devices rather than face-to-face. So there's a lot of support that parents can provide their kids when that question of getting a phone comes up.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is making me think about, some of the advice you maybe commonly hear, or at least I was hearing a few years ago, like when your kids gets on social media, have, follow their accounts or have them friend request, make sure they accept your friend request or whatever, follow their Instagram account, which makes me think, okay, I could follow my kid's Instagram account, but almost every kid has a Finsta. Tell us what a Finsta is, and tell do we just throw our hands up and just give up? I mean, I don't even know.
Yeah. So like the Finsta versus the Rinsta. So your main public facing Instagram account would be open to your parents, possibly. The Finsta account, which would kind of is a mash of fake Instagram, would be the more private account that only some of your friends have access to. And that's actually, ironically, the real Instagram account. It's not fake.
It's not as curated and
exactly.
Like for public consumption.
Exactly. So you're always going to get that. And so, this kind of blanket advice of, make sure to follow your kid on social media. I'm not sure how helpful that is, because all kids are different and some are going to really resist that, and that's probably not going to work for them. But I do think having these upfront and very candid and regular conversations about what they're doing in a non-judgmental way, because I think if you start to approach these conversations in a judgmental way, you're gone, you're toast. You're not going to make any headway with your child. But being open and curious and really just honest, about your concerns, and open to hearing what they're excited about, those are really important conversations. And so, maybe you're not going to have access to everything. However, if you're talking about younger kids like 11, 12, well, first of all, they should not be on social media. It's illegal for them to be on social media at that age. But if you're deciding about what sorts of apps or what sorts of access to give them on their phone, you are absolutely within your rights as a parent to set up those parental controls. But I would say do so in a way where it's a conversation, because there's a lot of important development going on in those tween years. As you kind of said in a few minutes ago, where kids are starting to pull away a little bit from their parents and test the waters, develop their autonomy. And if they feel like they're being spied on or monitored, that's not going to be a great context for them to develop that autonomy, but also maintain a connection with their parents and a trusting relationship, which is the goal. So the goal is not just complete autonomy. The goal is individuation, where you become more autonomous, but in the context of continued connection with your parents. And so, having these conversations with your children it's so important. And then working with them to, install whatever controls feel right for that particular family context is really important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for telling us about that. Just as we think a little bit about older kids here, teens and young adults, I know there's probably several important topics here. But you talk about, what am I looking for here? Oh, this whole idea of hashtag activism and supporting teens and younger adults' involvement in the broader world. Can you tell us kind of what some of the issues and considerations, what's going on with teens and tech and that stuff?
Yeah. So, teens, one of their big developmental jobs is to figure out who they are and who they are in relation to the world around them. And of course, today, a lot of that work that they're doing is happening online. And there's some great opportunities there where they can not just explore their own identities, but also, if they find things that they're passionate about, connect with a whole community or a whole society that's also interested and passionate along with them. And that can be a really powerful opportunity, especially for teens whose identities in some way are marginalized. A lot of my research in my second book was about LGBTQ plus youth and how they turn to online fan fiction communities to not just explore fandoms that they love, but also to explore their identity and to experience community in those contexts. And so there can be really great opportunities there, but also there can be downsides, exposure to bigotry, to any sort of prejudice, racism, sexism. All of that also, as we all know, that exists online too. And so being aware of what kinds of communities your child is participating in, are they supportive or are they hurtful in some way? Being alert to those questions is really important, because there is a lot of great opportunities out there. But there's also some dangers as well, and it's important to be on the lookout. And as we kind of talked about earlier, sometimes they can be happening on the same platform, which just adds to the challenge.
Yeah, right. Twitter, for example, can be a great place for organizing social movements. And I think about the teens at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School who've used Twitter to great effect to advance their causes. And then I think of, there's obviously a lot of difficult interactions and cyberbullying happening there as well.
Yeah, it's really, really complicated territory for teens to navigate. Absolutely.
Well, and I jotted down here one point that I got out of your book, which I think is very important. You mentioned avoid setting blanket restrictions on your child's technology use that don't take into account some of these nuances.
Well, that's the thing. There's so much good, there's so much bad. And if you just set these blanket restrictions, you're going to lose all of the bad, but also all of the good and all of the complexity and nuance in there. And probably your child's going to resent you for it. And so I think it's important to have those conversations and really try to tune in to exactly what is that experience. And it's hard. This is not easy, because it's not always visible, what's going on these different platforms. Sometimes your child may not want to talk to you about it, but that doesn't mean to give up. You just need to keep on asking. And also, again, with compassion, with empathy, with curiosity, rather than judgment and sort of, all these preformed ideas about what might be going on.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap this up here, because I have a million questions written down that we didn't even get to, and we'll just have to refer people to your book to read it and think about those questions themselves. Overall, I guess I'm I want to say I'm glad that you're doing this research and speaking to parents about it and raising these questions and considerations in this nuanced way, because, we were just talking about this blanket approach or this one size fits all approach. And that, I think earlier on, in the 10 and 15 years ago, as I was starting to get into parenting, that was more the messaging, I think. And probably because, it was earlier and whatever, and it's fine. But I think as we go and as we learn more, what do they say? As you know better, do better. And this stuff is complicated.
It is.
And so I guess that's a very long way of saying thank you for opening this topic and speaking to it and sharing some of these nuances with us, because I think it's going to help people who, as you know, parenting is hard. Single parenting is hard.
Yep.
And we're in the trenches every day. And, and when it comes down to, do I let my kid wants a phone, my kid wants to watch Paw Patrol for 15 hours, my kid, and what do I do? So,
exactly.
So thank you. I always like to wrap up with a question here to my guests and leave us with one parting thought. If you could say one thing to widowed parents about this whole topic of digital parenting and our kids' technology use, what would you say?
I would say, and if it needs a little bit of explanation, but I would say that good enough can be great, and to lean in to good enough digital parenting. This is a concept that I talk about in the book. And I actually get the idea of the good enough parent comes from a mid-20th century pediatrician, Donald Winnicott, who talked about the good enough mother, but I updated it for the 21st century. We talk about the good enough parent. And the idea is basically that Winnicott argued that we really shouldn't be there for our kids 100% of the time to solve all their problems, to, help them navigate tricky social situations, or to figure out, or to have them the next activity when they get bored. Because again, they're not going to be able to develop their own inner resilience that way. And so I translate that into the digital space by saying, you know what? There's no one size fits all magic pill that you can take, or this one answer that you can answer, and then you'll suddenly know everything about and how to manage your kids' technology use. Because, the research just isn't there to say, do this and not do that. But at the same time, we do know enough to know, well, there are better technology experiences and there are worse technology experiences. And so good enough digital parents, they do their best to steer their children towards self-directed, community-supported experiences, knowing that they're not going to be able to be perfect at this 100% of the time. And they give themselves a little bit of grace for when they aren't, but they also observe and they readjust and set a new course as needed. And also when it comes to their own technology use, inevitably we're going to make our own slip-ups, because these things, again, it comes back to design. They're very compelling for us as well as kids. And again, be easy on ourselves, but also use those inevitable slip-ups as teaching opportunities for our kids. So I do this a lot with Oliver, where if I'll just notice that my attention is gravitating to my phone or my email, and it's getting in the way of our interaction or our play together, I'll catch myself and I'll actually call attention to it and say, you know what am I doing? I shouldn't be doing this. Let me put this away and let's focus on what we were doing together. As he gets older, I'm going to start talking about dark patterns and how these technologies are designed, so that he actually understands, and that it's not just all on us as individuals to figure this out, or it's not an indication of our inner failings or our individual weaknesses. But no, these technologies have been designed very specifically for that. So yeah, I would just urge parents to embrace the good enough digital parent and know that actually good enough is great when it comes to parenting.
All right, terrific. Well, I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Dr. Katie Davis, author of Technology's Child, Digital Media's Role in the Ages and Stages of Growing Up. So Katie, where can listeners find you if they'd like to learn more about your work?
Yeah, so I have a weekly newsletter that explores ideas from the book and also has updates about the book, events and things like that. And you can sign up for it at my website, which is katiedavisresearch.com. And also on my website, you can find all past posts from the newsletter and information about where to buy the book and follow what I'm doing with my research and things like that.
All right, terrific. Well, we'll make sure that we put that in the show notes. And Katie, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you so much, Jenny. This was great.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dr. Katie Davis as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Just look for episode 147. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.